Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Parent University seminar of the 2020-2021 school year. My name is Nate Jones, and I work in the communications department for the Douglas County School District. Before we begin tonight, I just want to thank our outstanding partners at Skyridge Medical Center. This series would not exist without them, so thank you to Linda and her team for the continued support and the interest in partnering with our families here in Douglas County. Thank you, Linda and Skyridge. Tonight, we're going to hear from Dr. Adam Barkin, Medical Director with Skyridge Medical Center, who is going to talk about general physical wellness during a pandemic. And he's also going to give us some tips on how to navigate both COVID-19 and the flu season, as well as some tips on talking with your children about the pandemic. At around 6:15, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we are going to bring on the amazing folks in our DCSD Health and Wellness Department. This includes Dr. Stephanie Crawford, and Zach Hess, who are two directors for health, wellness, and prevention, as well as Lori Lacombe, who is our Healthy Schools coordinator here in DCSD. And they're going to chat a little bit about self-care and what you can be doing as a parent here in DCSD. And we're, kind of working with that mental hygiene aspect of it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Adam Barkin to get us started with his presentation. And I'm also going to pull that up because I believe I am helping him out with that.
Thanks, Nate, and thanks to everyone who's joining tonight. Honored to be here, and hopefully, I know it's a Wednesday night. I have two kids of my own who are currently supposed to be doing their homework and not making noise in the background. And I'm sure you all have busy nights too. So, the fact that you're making time for this is great, and hopefully we give you some useful information. As Nate said, I'm the medical director in the emergency department at Skyridge. We also have another emergency department, a freestanding emergency department in South Parker at Parker Road and Hess. And so between those two emergency departments, we see a lot of patients from Douglas County and a lot of patients currently who have COVID and a lot of people who have stress around COVID. And so my goal tonight is to talk to you all about, some of the basics of COVID, which we all know, and so we'll kind of breeze through some of that. But I also want to talk specifically about where we can, be helpful to our kids and ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So, Nate, I'll just give you, I'll just ask you to advance, and we'll go to the next slide. Actually,
are we seeing the full slide right now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and advance for you then.
Okay, thanks. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about. You go to the next slide too, Nate. Thanks. So just a brief overview on coronavirus, and I think we've all been inundated with what coronavirus is and what COVID-19, but just as a very brief, level setting, it's a common virus. We've all had coronavirus probably many times. This one just happens to be particularly dangerous, infectious, and lethal, unfortunately. There's 7 coronaviruses that infect humans. They range from the SARS-CoV-1, which was the original SARS in 2003. There's the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which was in 2012 and actually is still out there. And then, of course, we have SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19. So, Nate, we'll go to the next slide if you don't mind. And we'll just cover briefly just the symptoms. We're now getting smarter about what symptoms are, prevalent with COVID. And when we first started, we thought this was just a disease of the lungs. It turns out COVID is a disease of the small blood vessels. So really any organ, any body part that has small blood vessels, whether it's your brain, your lungs, your heart, your kidneys, even your skin, can be impacted by this virus because it damages those small blood vessels. And the most common presentation we see in people is that, cough and shortness of breath. And that's commonly how people present, but it can have a whole host of weird symptoms. People can have heart problems where their heart function becomes less. They can have myocarditis. They can have neurologic symptoms where they have strokes. They can have blood clots, rashes, vomiting and diarrhea are common. we're now also starting to break up the symptoms of COVID into major and minor symptoms. And that's helpful because we can say, fever, shortness of breath, and a cough may be major symptoms, and that may lead you to get a test sooner or quarantine yourself. Whereas if you have a runny nose and sore throat, especially at this time of year, that can be just your average cold, which is not dangerous. And so we really need to separate those things to some extent, but it's hard because the testing isn't perfect and the symptoms aren't perfect. So, the main thing is, if you have symptoms or you're concerned about symptoms, you either need to, talk to your physician, your pediatrician, or, an urgent care and discuss whether, testing is indicated or what you need to do. We all want to be cautious at this time. The last thing any of us want to do is to shut down our kids' schools or introduce COVID to a wider range of people than we intended. Thanks, Nate. So, one of the questions that comes up frequently, both in the medical world and also the lay literature, whether you're reading, the Denver Post, listening to 9 News, whatever it might be, is how contagious is COVID? And there's this statistic called R0. And R0 is how many people will a person with a disease infect. And for influenza, which is a fairly infectious virus, it's about 1.5. Now that 1.5 is assuming you're not doing social distancing, you're not doing masks, and you're just sort of doing normal hand washing. Coronavirus without any social distancing or any other masking is 2.5, so quite a bit more infectious. And you can see how this is really what happened in the spring when we didn't know that much. That one person on the left here infects 2 people, who infect 4 people, who infect 16 people, who infect 32 people, and it happens very quickly. And that's why we see exponential growth curves with coronavirus. Thanks, Nate. Of course, one of the other problems with coronavirus is its incubation period. People can be asymptomatic and still shedding virus and infecting other people before they have any symptoms or when they have minor symptoms. The other issue is the incubation period can last up to 14 days. So someone who's asymptomatic or has mild symptoms still may not develop full-blown, illness for 14 days. And that's why the CDC recommends that really prolonged quarantine period if you've been exposed. Most people, about 80% of people, develop symptoms within 5 days. So that 5-day, this says, that 5 days is about 50%. I think that number now we're feeling is much higher because people have minor symptoms that maybe were not initially identified as COVID. And then of course, 30 to 40% of those people with COVID really are asymptomatic. And that's one of the big issues. If you have the flu, you have the flu in general. You feel like, you feel crummy, you're tired, you've got muscle aches, you feel like, a truck ran over you. If you have COVID, you may have like minimal to no symptoms. And that's what makes it particularly dangerous. Thanks, Nate. So testing is a big issue, and it's going to become a bigger issue as the winter goes on and we start to need to do influenza testing, RSV testing. I thought I would just give a brief overview of kind of the 3 testing strategies we have right now. First, at the top, there's this antibody testing, which is done on blood. This is really not a test you want if you're worried you have COVID, because it really evaluates whether you have antibodies to the disease. So it means you've had a past infection. Then there's PCR testing, which is really the gold standard. These are these swabs that you either take of your throat or your nose at this point, and it determines active infection. Unfortunately, some PCR testing, most PCR testing is taking between at least 24 to 48 hours. In the beginning of COVID, these tests were taking 9 or 10 days to come back, if not longer. We've gotten better. We have more capacity for testing, but it does take longer. And then there's antigen testing, which is also a nasal or a throat swab. And this is looking for a specific component of the virus. And it determines, again, active infection, but really you have to be pretty symptomatic for this test to flip positive. So if your kid or you have like really, typical symptoms of COVID and you get an antigen test which is negative, that does not mean you don't have it. It means you need to be followed up with a PCR test most likely. The nice thing about antigen testing is it is very quick and it comes back in 15 minutes or so. Now, what's the future of testing? Well, all these companies around the world, and especially in the United States, are working on new testing platforms. All the hospitals, especially Skyridge, in about 2 weeks, we're going to roll out a test that will do COVID, influenza A, influenza B, and RSV all with one swab. So that's what we're going to be looking at for this winter. It's not quite active yet, but and then my guess is that there'll be new testing strategies in addition. Thanks, Nate. Immunity. So this is the other question that comes up, and we need to talk about it because there's a lot of talk in the press and in politics right now about herd immunity. Herd immunity is going to happen whether everyone gets infected or whether there's a vaccine, because really what herd immunity says is that 70% of the population is protected from the disease. And that can either be because they've had it and they've developed some level of immunity, or it can be because they've had a vaccine. Hopefully the vaccines are successful. But what we need is for 70% of the population to either get vaccinated or to have had COVID. And that's about 200 million Americans, which is a lot. Now, the mortality rate, if you look at that, it's about 1% for COVID, maybe a little bit lower now, which means 2 million people, so 10 times the number of people that have died right now, will die without herd immunity or a vaccine. There's this idea of from the 70s about chickenpox parties, where you would basically intentionally, you'd bring all these kids together with one infected kid, let them all play together, and everyone gets chickenpox and gets over it for the rest of their life. Maybe a good idea with chickenpox because it was has such a low mortality. Only about 150 people died from chickenpox at its peak. Unfortunately, with COVID at its peak, we were seeing 2,000 or more people die a day. And so really, intentionally exposing ourselves to COVID, in my opinion, is really a bad idea. I think we'll end up with a significantly higher mortality and number of deaths that are unneeded. I think the best course of action is continuing to do social distancing, wearing your masks, and really living a different life than we were used to. The good news is vaccines are under active development. I am really hopeful from what I read and what I listen to is that the general population will have the option to get a vaccine in late spring or early summer 2021. I think once it's proven to be safe, there's going to be a rush to get everyone vaccinated so they can return to normal. Right now, unfortunately, only about 30 to 40% of our population said they would get the vaccine if it was available today. Again, this is, overshadowed by politics and some other issues in our world right now. But I think if we can demonstrate the vaccine is safe in the early part of 2021 with first-line workers and some, vulnerable populations, I think that most people will end up getting the vaccine. Thanks, Nate. So these next slides we're going to move through quickly, but I've been sporadically pulling off screenshots from Johns Hopkins, which is probably is the best tracking mechanism in the at least that I found, the easiest to read. And these are really nice graphics. So this is from March 25th. This was worldwide. So March 25th, we had under 500,000 total people in the world who had COVID. And under 20,000 deaths. Next, Nate. On this same date, we had less than 1,000 deaths in our whole country. March 25th, 55,000. Go to the next slide, Nate. This is June 20th. You can see the dates down there at the left corner. Now in the world, we're up to 463,000 deaths and almost 9 million infected people. Next, Nate. The same date, June 20th, we've gone from under 1,000 deaths to 120,000 deaths in the US. And then the next slide shows a screenshot from just a few days ago. This was October 16th. Worldwide, we have over 1.1 million deaths and 40 million global cases. And then the next slide, I think we're probably all familiar with some of these numbers. At this point, we are over 220,000 deaths in our country and over 8 million infections. And so if you look at that as it's just an astounding number because, on March 25th, this year, which seems like forever ago, but really it was just, a handful of months ago. We had less than 1,000 deaths, and now we're over 220,000. So next slide, Nate. Thank you. Let's take a little deeper dive at Colorado, and this is what everyone in the governor's office, at the hospitals, and in our communities are concerned about. So you can see this is, we're now on the third peak. So our first peak was around the end of April, but we saw a pretty steep increase. And then we got really, the community shut down, restaurants were shut down, bars were shut down, gyms were shut down, and COVID, really sank to low numbers. And then right after July 4th, with the incubation period of 2 weeks, we saw a big spike in cases again. And we had July 27th or so, we hit our peak. Again, people started being more careful, numbers went down. And then, again, right after Labor Day, we start seeing these numbers accelerate. Now the numbers are higher than they've ever been, and we're still heading in the wrong direction. I know the governor is making almost daily announcements on some new policies, and the city of Denver, gatherings are limited to 5 people at this point. So, this is what's concerning. And if you go to the next slide, Nate, this is the good news is we've gotten much better at treating COVID. So we're seeing far fewer people die. This is the number of deaths, a 7-day average. The other thing that's happened is that it's been a much younger population that's had COVID in these second rounds. So in the July round and then in the present round, we're just seeing a different population. We're not seeing as many nursing home patients. We're not seeing as many vulnerable patients with comorbidities. So this is good news. I think the concern is that this could continue to go up. Thanks, Nate. This looks at age groups, and this is, points to what I was just saying. The bottom line is we've just seen many more young people. That's partly because schools are back in session, or there's more interaction between kids on sports fields. But what we're seeing is, now, over half of the COVID cases are in this basically under age 29. Thanks, Nate. And then this is also shows, the percentage of people who are dying, unfortunately, from COVID, and the vast majority, 52.72, are 80 plus, and then add that to the 23% in the 70 to 79 range. So you have, 75% of people who are, in that elderly population. And again, that's why we see that huge spike early on. And in our current case, we're seeing, still they represent, that elderly population represents the majority of deaths. We're just seeing much less of them. Thanks, Nate. And then this specifically looks at schools. I pulled this out and I put this, that it gets blocked by the that little text box by week October 11th, but it has important information in it. So at October 11th, we saw 10%, over 10% of all infections at that time were in the group defined as camps, education, and childcare. So that's really, at this point, preschools and schools are making up over 10% of our cases. And at the beginning, even when we weren't doing as well with social distancing and schools may or may not have been all shut down, that subset of the population, those kids, made up a super small group. Thanks, Nate. We'll go to the next one. This again is data pulled from a few days. And again, these are the things that we're looking at as we're starting to get more and more worried about COVID in our community. I highlighted a couple things here. I think this was again October 16th as the day, just so you know. In Colorado, we had over 1,000 cases that were positive on that day. And then the other highlighted here is the positivity rate of 5.64%. The last I saw, I think yesterday, was over 6%. This is a key metric we look at as far as when we need to increase our restrictions on people, whether it's shutting down schools that are open or in hybrid learning. There's no one number that we can look at or the state looks at. to say, well, we need to shut down a school. It's looking at the number of outbreaks. It's looking at positivity rate. It's looking at the number of cases per 100,000. There's a whole host of factors that need to be used. But the trends are concerning right now, and I think they're only going to probably increase in the next week or so. Thanks, Nate. And then this is that R naught that I was talking about. So this is actually the number of people. If you have one person, how many people that one person infect? And right now, again, this was October 16th. There was 1.12, which is way better than 2.5. But really, we want this number under 1 because that means that it's going to be the disease burden will be shrinking, and we've seen this number slowly increase. Thanks, Nate. So that was a lot of information very quickly. And I imagine that many of you have seen these numbers before and that you're aware of it. I wanted to just do that brief overview so people had a sense of, where we've been, where we're going, and, to some extent why those in the healthcare world and our families too. I mean, myself and my wife, we talk about this all the time about how, how we're worried about, not only our community, but our state, our families, our country, and everyone else. So, COVID means different things to different people. If you were already homeschooling and you worked from home, maybe not such a big disruption, but there's a lot of people, myself included, and I'm sure people on this call who cannot work from home. Your job is at a hospital, your job is working at a grocery store, your job is delivering packages. So there's many people who cannot convert to a Zoom work life. How old are your kids? That's a huge variable for what this means to you. Are your kids old enough to get on their own Zoom calls with their teachers? Are they old enough to make their own meals when mom and dad are busy with their work? Or are they 6 years old and they need help getting dressed and doing all those things? Or maybe they're not even old enough to have the option of going to an online education. Of course, who do you live with? Are you living with vulnerable family members that you need to even protect further, that limits your ability to have any contact with other people because you're worried about your family? Of course, one of the biggest questions, I'm sure, especially for this group, is what's going on with school? Are we in a hybrid environment? Denver Public Schools went back to school today for lower school, but the middle schools were basically told to continue with hybrid. This is a huge deal for families, and it's very disruptive. What do we do about childcare? What do we do about lunch? All these things that schools have typically, not only are schools educating our kids, but they give many degrees of freedom to families to either work or have some bit of space, which often has been literally evaporated during COVID. And then, it's so important to have this, interactions with other people, whether it's family and friends. And, how do you do that safely? How do we do that responsibly? And how do we protect our community and prevent further spread either amongst ourselves or our community? I think the word unprecedented has been used so many times when talking about COVID. I try not to use that word anymore because I feel like it's just too much. But the truth is, most of us, if not all of us, have never experienced or seen anything like this. It's a true trauma. It's a once in a lifetime event, or I at least hope it's a once in a lifetime event so that we never have to experience anything like this again. I think about, my childhood and how, there were certainly tragedies and events, but those events seemed to last days, and then you would move on to normal life. If you think about our kids who are now, when they go outside, they have to put a mask on. If they go to school, they have to put a mask on. If they go to soccer practice, they have to put a mask on. These are, things that I don't think any of us would have predicted hope for or want to see extend for 6, 9, 12, 18 months. Thanks, Nate. So I think one of the most common factors that we see in the emergency department and with our own families, and I'm sure this will be covered in the second half of this presentation at length, but stress. We see more stress on people who come to the emergency department. We see more anxiety. It's expected. It's universal. I think all of us feel it. And if we're not feeling it, we're probably not being honest with ourselves about how stress is impacting us and how COVID has disrupted our lives and really, taken so much away from, ourselves, our kids, our families. And it's when the end is not clearly in sight, it makes it harder. So, how we approach stress and help our children is key. We need to recognize it and acknowledge it. We need to help our children cope with it. That's super important because if we can help our kids get through this, it'll make their lives hopefully better. And we need to create as much normalcy as possible in an abnormal time. And we'll talk about some of the strategies, and I'm sure that'll be covered later also. Thanks, Nate. So, if you look at manifestations of stress, there's so many. I tried to focus, some of these certainly appear in adults and teachers and doctors, but kids too. And we'll see kids who are more agitated, who become clingy, who become afraid of, things that they weren't afraid of before. I have a friend whose 7-year-old son is literally afraid of the wind right now. Has nothing to do with COVID. And I'm not sure exactly why this fear developed, but this little boy is having a hard time when it gets windy outside and becomes very clingy to his mom and dad. We see a regression of behavior. We see kids who start wetting their beds again, start sucking their thumbs again, all these things that maybe have passed years back and now are reemerging. We see kids who are just quiet and withdrawn. It's one of my big warning signs if we start seeing kids who were chatterboxes and outgoing who now become withdrawn. And we also see kids who are angry. We see adults who are angry. We've lost so much during COVID, and we need to acknowledge that. And we need to, really figure out how we're going to find sources of joy in a time where so much has been taken away. Thanks, Nate. So, this is not rocket science as far as how we respond to our children's stress, and it doesn't require anything really from us except time. And I think that, as I, wrote this slide, we're talking about response to our children's stress, but we also need to talk about our own stress and how do we deal with our own anxiety. And to some extent, time is also important for us, actually to a large extent. We need to make sure that we find time to exercise, time to be away, time to take a walk with the dog, just to breathe fresh air. But we really want to give our children that extra love, that extra attention and time, as I said. We want to listen and speak kindly. I'm sure we all try and do this. We're far from perfect, at least I'm far from perfect, and always listening and speaking kindly to my kids when they've asked me the same thing 14 times in a row. But especially during these times, we need to really try. Again, we want to try and establish normalcy as much as we can. These routines and schedules, which our kids are so used to when they're attending school every day. They go get on the bus after eating breakfast, after brushing their teeth, and now school may start at 9 o'clock and they can be in their pajamas. Well, it's important, even when things aren't normal, we want to establish those routines. We're going to eat dinner as a family every night at 6:30. We're going to take a walk with the dog every day at noon because PE is canceled, or you're at home and we're going to do this because I have my lunch break and we're going to get outside together. And then equally important, we all have to find opportunities for fun and relaxation. Very few of us are traveling right now. I mean, the airline business is decimated. Very few of us want to travel. So how do we make lemonade out of lemons? How do we do some new activities that are safe and socially distanced, that we didn't try before, but are a lot of fun. And each family and each person and each kid need to find that for themselves. But it is important to find that fun. Thanks, Nate. One of the questions I've been asked a number of times in talking about COVID, and I'm far from perfect at this, but the question is, how should we talk to our kids about COVID? And should we watch the news with them? Should we read the newspaper article to them? Should we talk about politics with them? And, you know, these are some of the guidelines that I try to follow, that I've read, to try and, you know, make sure that my kids know enough that they feel comfortable asking me follow-up questions, but I also don't want to, you know, lead to more stress or for them to be more anxious. So I think if we can be clear and direct in our conversations, talk to them about the facts, but don't necessarily politicize or try to polarize a topic. We want to be reassuring. We want to tell our kids that it's going to be okay, that we're going to stay positive whenever possible. We need to acknowledge that, you know, this is going on, that people are getting sick. Even we may have family members who get sick. And in conclusion, we really need to be patient with our kids as we try to balance the information we want to give them, and let them ask the questions and let them digest it and let them think about it. Thanks, Nate. These are a couple of screenshots I pulled off from a website that talks about stress in different age groups, and it goes through different ages. There's preschool and then grade school and then high school. The couple things we've talked about a lot of this again already, but these are some of the reactions we see. But the how to help section is really important. We're going to be calming, we're going to be patient, we're going to be tolerant, and we're going to really try to set up a really normal routine as much as we can. You can move to the next slide, Nate. This looks at school age kids. Again, gentle but firm limits. We're going to talk about how we create family routines. And then we're also going to do things like exercise and play sessions for this great group. And then next page, Nate. And for the older kids, one of the big things is limiting media exposure. This is really hard I'm sure in sophomores in high school. I have young kids, so I don't have any idea what's going to happen when my kids have their own phones and can text and do everything else with their friends. But I think the more we can keep our kids engaged with things other than, social media to some extent, the better off we are, and keep kids engaged in other ways. Thanks, Nate. So I've mentioned this a couple times now, but I think equally important is how do we take care of grownups? You and me, Nate and Zach and Linda, everyone else on this call. Because if we don't take good care of ourselves, we won't take good care of our kids. We will be less effective in talking to them and helping them and recognizing when they're stressed. So we want to find your outlet. Zoom happy hours, exercise, Netflix, reading, meditation, whatever works for you. We need to help ourselves too. Thanks, Nate. And then how do we protect ourselves? And this goes back to the medical side a little bit, but I do want to reemphasize all the things that I think from a physician's perspective, as a parent, as someone who works with schools, that I want everyone to do in our community, whether you live in Douglas County, whether you live in Denver County, whether you live in Utah or anywhere else in the US. Follow your local guidelines. If restrictions increase, please, make sure that you're doing the right thing to be respectful of that. Wear masks. Masks are proven to work. They're proven to protect you from getting an infection from someone who's wearing a mask. And if by chance you happen to be asymptomatic, it'll protect other people. wash your hands, with soap or hand sanitizer, socially distance. We want to avoid large gatherings, especially right now. And I'm going to add wear your mask a second time because I think it's so important. Thanks, Nate. So I want to talk briefly about influenza because it's, it's now flu season. I hope many of us on this call have already had their flu shot. I can't stress enough how important it is, especially this year, for everyone to get their flu shot because it will prevent many co-infections to some extent, but it will also, the flu shot's not perfect, but if it prevents a subset of the population from getting sick, it won't overwhelm the healthcare system. And honestly, it'll keep people out of the hospitals and the emergency departments. So people who have other diseases, including COVID, can use those resources, and it'll keep the general population healthy. Now, the interesting thing about the flu is we may see a very mild flu season this year. Maybe the strain is milder, but I think equally important is looking at sort of what we do now with COVID that's actually going to help the influenza. And we can look to Australia. So Australia is coming out of their winter season right now. They're in their spring. And first of all, vaccinations were up by 35% in 2020 for the flu in Australia, and they already had a pretty high vaccination rate. As of August 2020, and I couldn't believe this, but I looked it up in a couple of places, Australia only saw 21,000 cases of influenza compared to almost 250,000 in the same time frame in 2019. This wasn't because the vaccination rate went up. This was because people were socially distancing and wearing masks and being particularly careful about people who were coughing and sneezing. So I really can't emphasize that enough, is making sure that you and your family get the flu vaccine. It's free almost anywhere on health insurance plans. So pediatricians' offices, Safeways, Walgreens are all offering it, and there's plenty of it out there. Thanks, Nate. This last chart, I apologize, it did not reproduce well, but I think it's interesting nonetheless, because what I want you to see is that big yellow triangle in the background is COVID that went up so high. But at the same time, you can see that flu A, flu B, and RSV basically died last year, right as COVID hit. And again, that was because schools closed, kids weren't next to each other, but also we started wearing masks and socially distancing. So hopefully that trend continues and we have no big surges in flu this coming year. Thanks, Nate. So that's the end of my presentation. I think, let's see, it's almost 6:15. I want to give plenty of time for the rest of the session. And I think it'll be a really good chance to hear from some experts in the personal well-being and psychological well-being. So I'm happy to take any questions either now or at the end. And Nate, I don't know if you want people to put it in the chat or how you want to do it, but again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and to share some of this. And if there's any questions that come up either now or afterwards, you can always route them through Douglas County School, and they have my contact information, and I can try and get you those answers also.
And we do have a few minutes for questions. First of all, thank you, Dr. Barkin, for that presentation. Really appreciate your time this evening. We know you're busy. You got a family just like everyone else. So thank you for being here tonight. But I will open up the floor for questions. If we have any of our 10 attendees do have any specific questions for Dr. Barkin before we let him go, feel free to throw it in the chat and I can read it to him right here on the presentation. And if you came late, or if you have somebody in mind in your family or your friend group that could benefit from hearing this presentation, we will be throwing this presentation up on our website, our parent university website on dcsdk12.org. And we'll also have that on our YouTube channel as well, hoping to get that up tomorrow at some point. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Use the chat function to raise your hand. And if there are no questions, we can proceed. It looks like we may not have any questions for you, Dr. Barkin. So you're off the hook. But if anybody comes up with any questions after they watch this video on YouTube, or if they walk out of here and they go, oh man, I really wished I'd asked that, please feel free to email us at communications@dcsdk12.org. And we'll get that question to Linda Watson over at Skyridge, and she'll get that to Dr. Barkin. So again, Dr. Barkin, thank you so much for your time this evening. And please, oh, wait, here we go. Oh, this was one of the best COVID summaries I have heard. Thank you. That's from Rhonda Wegner.
Thanks. And Nate, I do see one question that came up in the Q&A, which I didn't know there was a Q&A, but I see. So,
oh, there you go. Yeah.
So there was a concern about the unknown issue with having the flu vaccine. I think that I just want to make sure flu vaccine and being more susceptible to COVID. I don't think that there's been any data suggesting that having the flu vaccine would make you any more susceptible to COVID. So I think in any decision we make in medicine, we look at risks and benefits. And to me, the benefits of being vaccinated against the flu far outweigh any risk of having a co-infection with COVID or having that possibility. So I would feel very comfortable getting the flu vaccine and getting it as soon as possible for your family, both to protect yourselves from the flu, but also protect the community as much as anything. There's some very preliminary literature that actually says the flu vaccine may protect you slightly from COVID, but unclear.
And is it, just speaking uneducated over here, but is it possible to get both at the same time? Could you potentially be dealing with influenza and COVID-19 at the same time?
So there is a risk of co-infection, and that is a concern, and that's another reason why that we are trying to protect as many people from influenza as possible. If you had the double whammy of flu and COVID, you could potentially be quite a bit sicker. COVID typically does not end up with the secondary bacterial infection. Actually, most people who have really bad courses with influenza end up with a bacterial pneumonia on top of it. That's why people get so sick and in the ICU. And that's what happened in like the Spanish flu of 1918, because antibiotics weren't prevalent. And that's why so many people unfortunately passed away. But COVID typically does not have that. But if you had the double whammy at the same time, that could be quite serious. The question came up about people with immune disorders and getting the influenza vaccine. I think this is a discussion you really need to have with your own physician if you do have an immune disorder. I think most, for instance, most oncologists I know who treat people with cancer who are on chemotherapy, they are adamant about getting their patients flu vaccines every year to protect them because they may have a significantly compromised immune system, or if you have other underlying diseases, say lupus or something else that would potentially compromise your immune system. My understanding is that physicians almost always recommend still getting that vaccine. And I think, but again, this is a very personal decision. And if there's any concern for you or your family, I would run that by your own personal physician.
Great. Thank you to Amanda for that question. If there are any others, feel free to hit us up now. And if not, like I said, you can always throw in additional questions here in the chat before the end of our session this evening, or again, at communications@DCSDK12. That'll hit all of us that work in the communications department. We can make sure that your question gets answered if you come up with anything after tonight's event. That does appear to be all the questions that we do have, Dr. Barkin. So once again, thank you for your time tonight. You're more than welcome to stick with us if you would like to stick around for the next presentation. But again, I'm sure you're super busy, so don't feel obligated to do so.
Thanks, Nate.
Thank you. All right. And so without further ado, thank you, Dr. Barkin. We are going to bring on our personalized learning team. These are folks that I'm very fortunate to work down the hall from here in Castle Rock. We've got Dr. Stephanie Crawford with us. We've got Lori Lacombe, and we've got Zach Hess, all of which work in the Douglas County School District Health, Wellness, and Prevention team. in our personalized learning department. So I'm going to let you guys go ahead and take over for me while I pull up your presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Nate. And thank you, Dr. Barkin, for the wonderful information about COVID and the flu and stress. Because definitely we can all say that at this point in time, we all have that in common, that we have some increased stressors in our lives. And I want to just again let you guys know we are so excited to be presenting to you. You know, Lori and Zach are in health and wellness and prevention, and I oversee mental health for the district. And together, our teams collaborate to support all of our students, our staff, and collaborate in the community to support mental health from all levels, from looking at universal skills of how do we set foundational skills of getting people prepared to handle situations and have really good physical and mental well-being. And then, of course, supporting people who are having some difficulties and need a little more extra support, all the way to our most intensive needs, because some people have even more intense support that is needed. And so we do it all together as a team, and we're excited to come and bring you some information tonight. So as Dr. Barkin talked about, we have a lot going on right now. In addition to just our normal everyday stressors of being parents, dealing with school and work, and regular flu seasons, we are dealing with COVID-19 and this pandemic and all of the extra stressors that come along with that. And we're going to talk to you tonight about some really practical strategies that you can do as parents to stay healthy for yourselves. And as Dr. Barkin mentioned, doing that models that for your children and helps them to be healthy, both physically and mentally. So we can't wait to share some of our information with you and help make sure everyone feels supported and is doing well. And I'm going to hand it over, Nate, to the next slide so that we can continue on.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So Dr. Barkin really talked a lot about this too, and we all know we're going through a lot. And we really wanted to concentrate on helping parents with this kind of this work-life balance, what's going on with having to educate our kids, having to work, and all of that that's involved. And one of the big efforts we're doing in the district is really working on adult social emotional learning and supporting our adults and our leaders, and by this, our parents. I can tell you, we were making this presentation, and yesterday I got notification that my son was now on 14-day quarantine, and we're missing lacrosse tournaments and lots of fun stuff. And I was right here, and then lots of stress, and it was a fun evening, as I'm sure some of you on this meeting tonight, this training tonight, can relate. So, thinking through that, I was like, there's things that we teach in the district around restorative practices, things that are trauma informed and around the social emotional learning, and things that I practice, that we teach our staff to practice and try to get those skills to our kids. And we wanted to share that with you. So that next slide.
Well, and as we're going to the next slide, I know if you're comfortable putting in the chat, we'd love to poll you guys and see where you're at. If you wouldn't mind sharing, meeting you at where you're at. How are you doing? Are you doing okay? Are you feeling the stress, but you're moving along, or are you just totally out of bandwidth and you're out of all your energy? Where are you guys at right now?
Yeah, if you don't mind sharing, that'd be great. So one of the big parts of our department that we do in the proactive side of things and the prevention side of things is a lot of restorative practices work. And I do this with my own family. And this is one of the quotes from one of the leaders in that. And I think it really pertains to how we can work through all these things as a family. And when we say human beings are happier, kids are happier, adults are happier, right? We're all more cooperative and productive. The thing about this quote here, and to remind us that this isn't taking the authority away. When we say to do things with people, the parent has to be the authority. The teacher is still the authority, and we really emphasize that. I think it's really important that we do understand that. But as parents, as adults in our kids' lives, there are some great strategies and get things going in the right direction when we're doing things with. And I think as adults, we appreciate that in our own life when we've been in these situations and things have been done to us. It doesn't feel good. Or for us, like we don't have value, right? So next slide, please, Nate.
And we have a comment from someone that says, doing fine, but with other stressors that had already happened and then adding COVID, it could maybe be a lot. And I agree. We talk a lot, and I try to visualize a pie chart. And in my pie chart, without COVID, I have a ton of slices with things I have to accomplish and stressors. And now I have a COVID pie piece. And that is taking up a lot of time and energy. And so you're absolutely right. Like, this is just something that adds on to the already great amount of tasks we have to accomplish as parents with our kids and other stressors that we had prior to this. And this is just yet another layer. And so it's so important that we are talking about this and learning how to make sure we're really doing things to be healthy, both physically.
We were really excited. My family, my wife especially, because she readjusted her schedule to support my younger son, my third grader, through school. And we're really excited that he was going to be going to school every single day. and now we're not. Back to that other slide. Thanks. And we're not. So we're adjusting, and someone commented every day is different, and it is different, and it adds a lot more stress. So, I was thinking about a strategy. Like, all this stuff that Dr. Barkin talked about is amazing. That is incredible information. And worth sharing, I think, with your family, depending on the different levels. And he gave you different examples there of age groups, of what could be happening and how to, maybe address some of those different things. And this is one way to do that. Call them family meetings. And it's important to understand that timing is everything. And I can tell you from last night that I needed to wait a while before we started addressing what was going on, because everyone was dysregulated. There was a lot of sadness finding out that we weren't going to be going to tournaments. We weren't going to be doing things. Halloween was right around the corner. I mean, it's very, very difficult. Ensuring everyone was regulated, getting us back to all where we could have a good conversation and I could engage with my kids and ask them, and they were able to participate. It's really an important thing to think about. And Stephanie and Lori are going to talk about a little bit more around that. But meal times, like Dr. Barkin said, schedule is important. So if you have a scheduled meal time, that's great, right? Sometimes though, we have to take advantage of what we have. I get to drive my daughter to gymnastics, and you know what, on that car ride or picking her up from school, we try to talk about this. We talked about last night on the way to gymnastics. So use those times you can find, and we just have to do that for ourselves. 3 ways I think that are really good to do this with, like really do this with our kids and with our families, with our spouses, our partners, and whoever else is in our family that we need to talk to, is really authentic engagement. And that's asking some really, really good questions. And you'll notice in those ideas there's not a why. So there's not a why are you feeling like this, or why did you do that? It's about what was going on, what are you feeling, what happened, and really trying to get some authentic engagement, really showing that no, I am honoring where you're at and that this was very hard for you. That very first thing, I love this, I use it all the time, but connect then correct, right? Connect with your kid, your spouse, which I do better with my kids than my wife, and she would tell you that, but validating those emotions, right? We're all getting upset. We all are getting dysregulated. Validate. I know you're upset. Look, I can tell you're really mad, right? And then let's talk about what happened. So these just authentic engagement, and then explain. Again, you're the authority, right? So explain why we're going the way we're going. What are the reasons for the decisions made? We got this information. This is what we're going to have to do with it, and this is how we're going to proceed. And then set those really clear expectations, along with routines. Kids expect expectations, and clearly define one from the authority figure in the house, right? From the adult. It's also a very trauma informed response. And we know that COVID is a traumatic event for kids and adults. And making sure that we establish that hierarchy in the family is really important to our kids, that they understand that the adults are there and they're in charge. Again, though, we want to do that with them and not to them or for them. I think it'll be more successful for all of us and reduce some stress. So think about that. Think about some of those easy ways of going about talking about these things, that, especially the things that are coming further in this presentation from Stephanie and Lori. Next slide, Nate.
Zach, I love what you said about connect and correct. I think that connection piece, we always want to correct things for our kids. We want to make everything better. And sometimes our kids just need to dish it out and let us know exactly how they're feeling, what they're going through. I had that with, I have a daughter up at CSU, as you guys know, and she got COVID. And then, so she was quarantined for weeks and weeks. And then she got let go from her job because of it. And it just, I just had to sit and listen to her and let her just get it all out. And then I said to her, Mia, I bet this is so difficult for you right now. And she, all of a sudden she went, pfft, and then she was ready to start to correct it. And so I think it's such a good reminder that to remind us how important it is to do that with our kids. So thanks for highlighting that. When we were planning this, we really wanted to take a moment to talk about what's happening in the brain and the body when stress does happen, because it's really natural, it's really normal, and it really reminds us that it's important for us to manage our own stress and not let stress manage us. And part of that has to do with how the brain works. So all our information comes into the brain. The body is constantly looking for am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? It's taking in sights and smells and sounds and temperatures and everything. And it comes through the lower brain. In the lower brain, we have the amygdala and hippocampus. And our hippocampus is our long-term memory, and our amygdala is our fight, flight, freeze mechanism, which really works with our emotions, works with our long-term memory, and decides, where do I send information in the brain? Where do I send it now that we have it? Hopefully we wanted to go to the prefrontal cortex, because that's where all our executive functioning happens, where we're superhuman. We make plans, we focus, we have a working memory, we make decisions. This is what we want, all the information to keep going to this part of our brain. But when we get stressed, whether it's a real threat or it's perceived threat, and our brain is perceiving it as, oh, I'm in trouble, I can't handle this, it sends information down to our adrenal glands and says, produce cortisol and adrenaline. And adrenaline gets our heart going, and cortisol tells our body, you know what, pay attention, don't sleep right now, don't digest your food, just really get all your senses ready to deal with what's going on. And because the brain is doing that, we don't get all the information to the prefrontal cortex. So we aren't as able to make a great decision, to listen, to put things in our working memory, to focus. And so it's really, I think it's great once I learned, like, oh, this is what's happening in my brain and my body, that allowed me the freedom to figure out, oh, these are things I can do to prevent that from taking over. So going to the next
and Lori, really quick, one thing, like, so people understand all that stuff surging in, that cortisol and that adrenaline, there's research out there that suggests it takes about 90 seconds to get in through your brain, right, and dissipate out of your system. And that's when we talk about being regulated, right, ready to respond, ready to talk to your kids. Not right in that moment is usually the best time. But if we can allow some time and space, those chemicals go, and we're able to do that, your kid is actually able to put their thinking brain online and talk to you. Yeah. And
I think like 90 seconds for some people, 15, 20 minutes for others. Like it could be really different. Like I could, in my household, I could tell you like, oh, let's let that one simmer a little longer, because he needs that kind of time, right? So going to the next slide, just stress on the body. There's short-term effects. You'll feel the heartbeat, the breathing quickens, you can have some digestion, your tummy kind of hurts, muscles get tight, and that inability to focus and make sound decisions. But then we are really learning about the long-term effects of stress. And this is especially as adults, and we adults take care of ourselves so we can take care of other people. And also just to live a happy life, right? Like we want to do our best and as parents, but we want to live a happy life as well. But there are some real long-term effects of constant stress on the body. Tension headaches, sleeping, that's a major issue. A lot of people go to the doctor about sleep concerns, mental health issues, cardiovascular issues, and that your immunity can be compromised. So the rest of this presentation, we really wanted to share with you some more strategies other than what Zach has already shared and Dr. Barkin shared with you on how we can help combat this stress. So Stephanie, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Lori, and thank you, Nate. So yeah, as we go on, we talk about resiliency and what do people who are resilient have in common? And there are a lot of factors that have been found that people who are able to manage stress and difficulties do have some key things in common. And 4 of those things are, number 1, humor. And we're going to go into all of these in more detail. Being able to make sure you give some time to yourself and do some strategies for yourself. Having supportive relationships and a good social network and that connection that's so important that we talk about. And then, of course, giving ourselves some grace and permission to be human and to mess up. And as we've talked about, some of it is not in our control. We are and protect ourselves. And sometimes, even if it's perceived, we go into that zone, as we've talked about, that 90 minutes or that 20 minutes, where we're not in a place yet to be able to talk and connect and problem solve, and giving ourselves permission to do that. And yeah, this is stressful. It's okay to not always be at our best, or to have, sometimes when we might not necessarily present things in the way we like or respond the best way to others. And so thank you, Nate, as we continue talking about humor. So laughing is really great for our mental health and our physical health. And laughing, in general, doing something fun, but also not taking ourselves so seriously. And what we know is that when we laugh, we create happy chemicals. We create these neurotransmitters in our brain, oxytocin, this feeling of belonging and well-being and happiness. And that helps regulate us and bring us back from whatever our stressors are. And so looking at that, when that happens and we're laughing, our muscles relax. Our blood pressure goes down. We're able to breathe better and take in more oxygen-rich air. And as you see, we even have a link to an article about that medically, of what goes on in your body, if you want more details about that. But being able to just laugh, and I'm just going to tell on myself, I have a 6-year-old boy, and when we are having stressful times, some of our favorite things to do are to watch the Captain Underpants movies. And it's just good old immature humor. The kids are doing messy things, there's farting, and we crack up and we allow ourselves to just be silly and immature. And then not taking ourselves seriously. Lately, during this time, I've been having a lot of trouble with saying the right things. And so I'll often say something like, hey, did you drink your vitamins? And then my son will laugh, oh, mommy, we don't drink our vitamins, we eat our vitamins. And I'll just laugh and go with it, like, oh, I'm so silly. And we have a good laugh. And I'm modeling, it's okay to not always have perfection that we strive for. It's okay to laugh at ourselves. And so that's something really important that we allow ourselves to have, even during really serious times. We need a break sometimes from all our tasks and all the serious talks and thoughts that we have. So thank you, Nate. We'll go on to our next resiliency. Those supportive relationships are so important. Those connections. And oftentimes it's people we're closest to. So our spouses, our parents, our siblings, our best friends. And that's really good to have, even as Dr. Barkin talked, sometimes it's virtual. You might have to do a happy hour or a little gathering by FaceTiming or Zooming. Sometimes though, we need to be able to have some space and time away from all of our friends and family And maybe that's a professional or a resource at work that we're given where the person doesn't know us and we have some anonymity to just be real and not feel judged and know I won't see you again after we have our time. So I can let it all out and get the support from you. And every situation might call for something different. So know that about yourselves and be aware of who are your confidants in your inner circle, but also who are your resources? Do you have resources at work to reach out to? Do you have a good network that can recommend good people to you? And make sure you're giving yourself that time to get the support. Because as parents, we're carrying a heavy load. We're supporting ourselves, we're supporting our kids. Sometimes we're supporting our own parents, depending on their age and needs. Maybe our siblings. You might be the family member that takes care of everything for the whole family, and you feel a lot of pressure. So make sure you're letting yourself get some support as well. So thank you, Nate. We'll go on to our next, which is, really taking care of ourselves. And I don't think that we often do this, but I try to remind myself that my biggest asset, as much as I love everyone else, my biggest asset to my family, to my job, is me. And I have to recognize that I'm as important as all the people I'm caring for. And if I don't take care of myself, I'm not much good to anybody else. And so making sure that we're taking time to do things that are fun, relaxing, and that fulfill us. So we might all have jobs we go to. We have family members we're caring for. But what feeds your soul? What really rejuvenates you? And are you able to carve out time to do that, whether it's 5 minutes or a day? Are you able to get some of that? Because that's so important. And remembering that, if we don't do that, we become less and less effective. As we've talked about, the effects of stress on our brain and bodies versus the effects of humor and calmness on our bodies are very different in making us able to be productive and have good relationships and outcomes. Even if it's just for a little bit, it's important that we do this every day for ourselves. And I will say this is hard. I tend to, and I know many of us do, we take a back seat to everyone else. When things are hard, we really tend to focus on the things that we haven't done or that we need to do, and we deprive ourselves of some really good positive things and relaxing things that we really need to keep going. So I'd really encourage us all, including myself, just don't do it. It is a big mistake. Let some things go. Let the dishes sit for a night. Let the laundry sit for a day. Those things will still be there, but you are first, and you are very important to everyone around you. So give yourselves that time to develop a routine every day to give yourself just a little bit of fulfillment and peace. And so moving on to the next slide, that daily routine for ourselves. We don't have to make these hard. You hear the stories of, I'm a marathon runner and I run 20 miles every day, or I work out at the gym 6 hours a day. I meditate for hours. Real life, we don't have that kind of time. Sometimes we don't have even 10 minutes. Sometimes we do have maybe 30. But research shows that really highly effective people have a consistent routine, either in the morning, or if you're not a morning person, nighttime routines are really good too. And having a routine and giving yourself some time, again, leads to that increased productivity that we're all looking for. And it might look different for all of us. Meditation for one person might be the traditional sitting and going, that doesn't work for me. Meditation for some of us might be just taking a walk outside and observing all the beautiful sights of the leaves changing in the fall and the beautiful sunshine and the nice wind blowing. Be different for each of us of what that looks like. And I will tell you that when you do this every day with intention, you get better at it, and it just becomes a part of your schedule, and you become more resilient. And if we don't have this happening, it can be hard on us. So I'll just tell you, sometimes my daily routine might be a 10-minute yoga routine. And that's what I can fit in. And that's a great day for me. Some days I don't have that. So that's 1 to 2 minutes of just sitting and reflecting before everyone else gets up in the household and chaos starts, to just give myself a moment, take a deep breath, and think about the things that I'm so thankful for. And that's what I've got. And I give myself permission to do that and not have to be a marathon runner or some other thing that we read about in magazines of how to be wonderfully good at taking care of ourselves. So these are just really, really important. And although none of us are glad to have COVID-19 in our lives or any other negative things, as we've talked about in Dr. Barkin, we can find some positives in the new ways in which we might be living our lives or connecting with our families. Or maybe if you're at home and you're not going to an office, not having that commute and what you're doing with that extra time. So being able to take time to assess what's hard, but what is also good, and giving ourselves that time to think about what's good. So as we think about that, moving on to our next slide of resiliency, is giving ourselves that grace and permission that I talked about to just be human. As parents, we have a high standard and we have a lot to model and teach our children, and that's a lot of pressure. But we also are humans and we make mistakes, and that's okay. So asking yourself, do you should yourself? Do you ought yourself? Oh, I should have gotten more done at work. I should have worked harder on, my landscaping and had a prettier yard and gotten that award. My kids should do better at their homework. I don't read to them enough. Do you do those things to yourself? Because when the going gets rough, that's what we tend to do, is focus on all the negatives and what we don't do, and not focusing enough on what do we do that's good. So being able to reflect and give ourselves a little grace and permission that what we're doing is okay. And what I did at work was actually really good. And if I take stock and compare myself to everyone else, we're all doing really good right now. We're coming to work, we're getting work done, we're productive, and we are holding it together. And that is okay. That is good. And as I take stock, or as you take stock, and we look at all the things we didn't accomplish, well, what did we accomplish? Wow, we got breakfast to all our kids and it was semi-healthy. Everyone got to their school and work on time. We came back home together and we learned, as Zach, about quarantine, but we still got pizza on the table. So at least that's dinner. We didn't starve. And so we tend to be our own worst critics. But when you really reflect on your day, and if your kids were to reflect on what you do, they're going to have a lot of positive things to say what you've done. So remembering not to always be our own worst critic. So thank you, Nate.
Stephanie, I love that positive self-talk. That has been one of my goals the last couple of weeks for self-care, is just really trying to focus on, okay, the negative message comes in, but I'm bringing a positive message out. Like, that didn't go so great, but this was a good thing that did happen. So I just wanted to share a few tips that we share with people all around the district through the work that we do through Healthy Schools. But and the first one is really thinking about, am I responding or am I reacting? And I have a beautiful example of reaction in my own house. This summer, I was working, and all my children are home. All 4 of them are hanging out, do it. And I'm like working. And I'd come into the kitchen and it was a mess. And one day I just lost it. And the look on my children's face was literally like I could tell they were uncomfortable, because I rarely lose it with my kids. I rarely do, but I totally lost it this time. And the visceral feelings that started coming up, my stomach was hurting, I was tight. Things came out of my mouth that probably shouldn't have come out of my mouth. And that was a full reaction. And I walked away from it, and I came back, because I need more than 90 seconds. I came back in about a half an hour, and I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm really sorry. Can we redo that? Can we take 2 on that? And I said, and then I really talked it out with them, and I took more of a response approach to it, where I explained how I was feeling, how it made me feel that they were all doing their own thing. I'm working really hard, but they're not helping to keep up after their own stuff. And how can we change it? And then we actually came up with a plan, and it really worked for like 3 weeks. And then we had to come up with a new plan, because that's what happens with kids, right? So really, as we are getting into some of those like tougher moments with our family members and our loved ones and everywhere, are we reacting or are we responding? And if we are reacting, I really want to encourage everyone to practice PBR, which is pause. I know you might be thinking something else, but it's not that. It is pause, breathe, and respond with intention. And that day I freaked out in the kitchen. What I probably should have done is I should have looked at it all, said to my children, I need a break. This is overwhelming to me. I'm going to go take a couple breaths outside, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. Kids love when you do that, by the way. They love when you're like, we're going to talk about this in a little bit. And then really take a few breaths, because when you breathe, when you take deep breaths, you calm the central nervous system down, you shrink the amygdala, you are able to get the information up to the prefrontal cortex so you can make a better decision. So PBR, everybody. The third tip I would say, and I think this has been touched on many times in this last hour and a half together, is be present. Be present. You are going to have such a better experience with your family, with your loved ones, with being present. A few years ago, I was doing homework with my youngest child. I was a teacher in the classroom back then, and I realized we had finished all his homework, and I had finished, and I was like, I don't even really know what we just worked on, because in my mind, I was so not present. I was thinking about, what am I making for dinner? Did I fold the laundry? Did I grade all the papers for school? And at that moment, I decided no more, no more. I am going to be present with my children when they're doing homework, when they're on the lacrosse field, when they're going to their jobs, talking about it before they go. I am going to be, all that other stuff can wait. It can wait. And it is a gift that you give not only yourself, you give it to other people. And the last thing I would say is, when things start to seem to be getting a little rough, go back to the basics. And what I'm saying about basics is, think about when you had the little baby and you're like, oh, have you had enough to eat? Have you had enough water today? One of my kids, she was having headaches. And my first thought was, is she really stressed out? But then I asked her, I said, hey, have you been drinking any water? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, let's get the water bottle. Let's fill it up, drink 2. We'll talk about it at night, see if it's got better. And now that's part of her routine. She drinks the bottle of water. The sleep is huge. We could do a whole workshop on this, right, you guys? Like, this could be its own hour-and-a-half time together. Sleep is so important. Are we getting enough sleep? Are we wearing the blue light glasses to block it out so our brains can create the melatonin it needs to relax and go into the brain waves of sleep?
Uh-oh.
It's okay.
I'm not sure if we lost Lori, but
Knowing Zoom, she'll be coming on in about 4 seconds mid-sentence. So we'll give her just a few short minutes here, unless you want to take over, Dr. Crawford.
I was just going to say, Lori was talking about breathing and how important that is and how that helps you relax. And I will also tell you, it's contagious. So I use this often for myself and for my child when he's agitated or escalated. I don't really need to address it because I know he's not in a place to hear. I will just come in and start doing some deep breathing, and then he's doing it. And the same at work. If we're in a highly contentious situation, just doing your own breathing and being calm is contagious. So, you don't even have to say anything to use some of these strategies to take care of yourselves and take care of your family. But yeah, as Lori was saying, go back to those basics. Same with my little one. Yesterday, he was in a mood and he kept saying, you're giving me a headache, and he's 6. And I thought, well, that's weird. And then I realized I have a headache too. grandma has a headache too. I think it's probably the horrible air quality that many of you have mentioned in this chat. And that's why he's so grumpy. He doesn't feel well, but he can't tell me that because he's little, but he can tell me that I'm causing a headache. So back to those basics of, well, let's take care of that pain, because when we're in pain, we're not very nice and we can be grouchy. And now that you feel better, we're having a much better time together. Lori, we lost you a little bit.
No, I'm sorry. It sounds like you tied it up perfectly. Our last slide tonight just provides our website and tells you exactly where to go. We all represent different pieces of this work in the district, and there are some fabulous resources on our website, and also our contact information if you want to get a hold of us. So I'm going to hand this back over to Nate and see if there's any questions, and then we can all go.
And one real quick thing, as we've talked a lot about what you can just do reasonably and we all can do, and it's free. But if you are feeling like it's a little more for yourself or your child, look at our website. We've got a lot of resources. You might need to reach out for a little more support and look to that. So be thinking about that as you're going through, like, what can we expect from what Dr. Barkin talked about and regression and what we've talked about, and what might be a little more intense, and you might need a little short-term help from some professionals.
Great. Well, thank you, you three. Thank you for giving us some time on a Wednesday night. I know that's not easy to do. I know you're all parents. So thank you for guiding our parents that have joined us this evening. If there are any questions from those of you that have joined us tonight, please feel free to ask. We've got 3 experts here in their field, and they're more than happy to answer any questions you might have. You can do it in the Q&A function, or you guys can type it to us in the chat. We've been watching the chat throughout the evening. And as you guys are typing out your question, the one thing I will ask is please, if you enjoyed tonight's webinar, please tell your friends about the Parent University program. Again, we partner with Skyridge Medical Center. They are fantastic partners. They give us so many resources to be able to host these and to pass along just great information to our community and be able to answer these questions that you might have. Thank you, Amanda, for the feedback. We appreciate that. And again, the recording of this will be hopefully live on YouTube tomorrow. So if you are looking to go back and watch this again, or you just want to share it with somebody that you think could benefit from the tips that have been provided by Personalized Learning, or any of the information that Dr. Barkin shared with us tonight, that will be live on our YouTube tomorrow. And you'll be able to find that on our Parent University website at dcsdk12.org. We'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any questions. Again, thank you so much for being an engaged part of our school district, for joining us for Parent University. And we will have more information soon on when our next dates will be. We will have a seminar in November and December. So thank you all very much for joining us. And again, thank you to Dr. Crawford, Zach Hess, and Lori Lacombe for being with us this Wednesday night. We've got one from Elizabeth here. Elizabeth asks, when an older student chooses to withdraw as a coping technique and wants to handle issues independently, are there subtle ways to encourage them to share so you can offer parent perspective and support?
I'm glad you brought that up, Elizabeth, and also thank you for your comment about even fake laughing can lead to good vibes, because you're right, just like breathing, it's all contagious, and you fake it till you make it. And some of you have mentioned how hard this is and the losses we've had of not getting to be with our friends as much. Our kids are a little more isolated. We're doing social distancing, depending on your school that you're in, your hybrid, your full-time, your e-learning. It's very hard times. And as part of that need for us, people have mentioned the hardest part of this is not knowing what to expect, which means we don't have any sense of control. And in order for our brains to feel safe and us to feel good, it's nice to feel a little control. Nobody likes to just be told what we're doing or have just weird, unexpected, and I apologize, that's my alarm to do things. Nobody expects to have, that we never know what's going to hit us at any moment. That is really stressful. And one way that we cope with that, and I see in my own family, is trying to get even more control. And so you may see people that are normally pretty chill. Suddenly they're bossing you around, or they have some hang up on a certain way things must be done, and that's not their normal. And so that may be the same for someone who is saying, I need some space and I got this handled. I can handle this. I am confident. I'm a competent kid. I don't need anybody. They're needing maybe a little bit of control. So as we've talked about in the beginning, is meeting everyone where they're at, thinking about the timing of when to talk. Some of the best things you can do with your kid is take advantage of those moments, like Zach said, in the car. When you're doing other things, you're doing some yard work, you guys are playing a game, you're cooking dinner together, you're in the car, whatever you might be doing. And so there's no like pressure, like we're going to sit and we're going to talk. And you can just slip that in, like some subtle, like, oh, this is how I do, or I've noticed this. Those are your moments when your kids really are listening, because it's not the main focus and there's not pressure to be told from you what to do. It's very organic and natural, and it feels really good. So I would offer that perspective is get those moments in with your kids as you're doing other things that don't feel like a lecture or like a meeting.
And I think that kind of going with the research around dosing, if you do it frequently and little bits at a time, especially as they're older, it works better too. So just like Stephanie said, and it's just little tidbits in there. You connect with them, honor where they're at, and maybe offer something or a chance to talk and let that go, and then try it again later and take those unique opportunities to do it. That tends to work also. We had a question in the question and answer from Astrid. So are there the resources and are there videos for teens to watch and get some ideas to help deal with stress? And I'll tell you, and I'll let Stephanie talk more about that, but I do know our counselors in every school have a list of resources that they have made available either on their own school websites or even on our district website for students to do that, to explore. And Stephanie, I know you can talk more about that.
Yeah, and one thing that's really good is I talked with you guys about, sometimes I literally have a minute or two to take care of some needs. And there are so many good resources from your school counselors, school psychs, and social workers, including mindfulness activities. And I don't just mean, again, like you have to sit and meditate and make sounds, but you can find some really nice, relaxing things that doesn't feel like work. Because if it feels like work, then it's not so good at de-stressing you. So take advantage of the resources out there from us, and also that you can find on like YouTube and such. I'm a really big fan of getting on and finding the vibrational sound bowls videos and hearing those sounds in the background. I notice if my family is getting a little antsy or whatnot, I'll put that on in the background and then suddenly we're calm. I'll also just tell you like little tips for your students, things like there's videos on things like yoga nidra, which is just sleep yoga. And you can literally just lay there and relax. Again, no stretching, no effort. You just get to be you and relax. So think about what works for you and your family and your teen. For others, it might be more active. So it might mean that they need an outlet to take the dog on the walk or do a project. My kiddo is not a sit and relax. So we have a bunch of wood stumps that we thought we could make into some good seating around our fire pit. So we gave him some tools and said, can you just take all the bark off? And that was really relaxing and hands-on and made him present and not be able to focus on all his stressors. Another thing that's kind of silly, but I tried today and was nice, I just put on YouTube like 4 hours of a fish aquarium because we don't have one of those. And that was super calming. So, think about that, talk with your family, see what they need, and talk with your really trusted resources at school for some tips for them.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Crawford. If you have any other questions, we can stick around for a few more minutes. I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I believe we can stick around for a few minutes. If you do have to head out, thank you again for joining us for this first edition of Parent University for the 2021 school year. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for coming. When people stick around, I always wonder if they're like, are they going to ask a question? Because I want to stick around for the answer.
I don't think we mind sticking around.
Well,
We love
thank you for your
getting the
time again. I know it's
information
not easy to give it up on a Wednesday, so thank you.
out. Yeah.
Okay, I see 3 people are still with us. If you do have questions and you don't want to ask it in this form, again, please feel free to hit us up at communications@dcsdk12.org. If you did not get an answer to a question that you wanted tonight, drop a question there and we'll track down the person that can get you the best answer. So thank you guys. Have a great night. And I'll see you 3 around the hallways back at work.
Yes, and we can do what you call napping.
I am so down.
Relaxation.
I'm down. I need more of that at work.
I mean, either way it works. Whatever works for people is good.
That's
So,
right.
all right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, guys.
Thank you.